Broadway Limited Imports was founded in 2001 by Anton Wenzel, Bob Zimmel, and Robert Gruber. In 2004, Robert Gruber bought the company out from his other two partners and moved the company down to Ormond Beach, Florida. The company has long been known for its sound-equipped locomotives. There is, however, one specific sound-equipped locomotive it would rather not be known for, and that is its Blue line of locomotives. To understand what made this line of locomotives so infamous, we need to go back to the beginning of DCC and sound-equipped locomotives. Back then, of course, DCC did exist, but was not, shall we say, something that was easy to come by. Mostly, if you had a DCC system, you were looking at a bill of upwards of $500, and you weren't going to get much for it. Systems like the aging Command 2000 were there, but, well, not cheap to acquire, to put it mildly. Broadway Limited decided it found a unique part of the market here. Several people were buying their DCC and sound-equipped locomotives to run as sound engines but on analog layouts, and so it would develop a locomotive without DCC-equipped decoders that would allow them to save the price of the actual decoder licensing and or installation of the DCC technology to their sound decoders and pass that along to their customers. Basically, everyone was supposed to win. And this is where the Blue line of locomotives was to come in, essentially saving a lot of money installing a DCC decoder that would normally not be used anyway, as the majority of people running layouts was still analog users to that specific date. However, unfortunately, there were some problems with this idea. Most notably and most detriment to this particular locomotive was the fact that DCC technology, like all other computer technology, and unlike most model railroad technology, which usually took decades to get in place in some cases, was maturing at a much more rapid pace. By 2004, DCC system prices began to fall through the floor. In addition, the quality became higher and reliability became higher, as well as the functionality and capability of these systems. All of this began to put a lot of stress and or pressure on the analog market and caused many a model railroader that dismissed DCC as being far out there and not affordable and downright witchcraft, if you speak to some model railroaders that had heard about this technology back in the day, began to think, maybe I will give that a try. After all, at that price, who wouldn't? The end result was more and more model railroaders began to pick up DCC and get rid of their analog system and or convert their layouts to DCC. This put Broadway Limited in a bit of a detriment as it had developed its new line of product to work more or less with the analog layouts. Although you have to give Broadway Limited some credit here, they had realized this going into it that there might be some that might want to upgrade these locomotives at one point, and so they applied an 8-pin style DCC ready socket to these locomotives to allow the engines to be upgraded to DCC and sound, and this is where the real headaches start. And this is also what brings us to the review of this particular locomotive, an RSD-15 in red and yellow Santa Fe Bluebonnet paint. I picked up this locomotive several years ago on eBay. I can't even remember exactly when I purchased it, and I do believe it had the decoder installed already. At first glance, the locomotive looks very nicely detailed, especially for the price that Broadway Limited was selling these models for. Again, Broadway Limited had these set to retail at around $200. Keep in mind, in those days, sound-equipped locomotives could get you easily in excess of $300. And at first glance, at least, this locomotive seems to run really well with no problems, and one would think, yeah, this must have really helped Broadway Limited catapult itself into a new segment of the market, right? Well, wrong. There were a lot of problems with these engines, but the most notable of which we'll get into now, and that is with the infamous electronics system. I'll try to keep this explanation as short-winded as possible. In electronics, when you have more than one chip and or device sharing the same data lane, or bus as it's better known as, we'll call it a road and or highway to make things more simplistic, you need another chip generally to control these operations to avoid conflicts. For the sake of keeping things simple again, we'll refer to this chip as a traffic cop chip. The main reason why it's required is that the data buses, which you can consider sort of like highways and or sidewalks or roads, can only have so much data being fed down them at the same time. And so the traffic cop chip basically has the responsibility of deciding which chip gets priority and to make sure that that particular chip does not interfere with any other chip trying to execute a task. And yes, you guessed it, the Broadway Limited Blue Line locomotives lack this chip. Now, this in itself is not a game-ending problem for this locomotive. It is still possible to make something like this work. The problem is now you're dependent upon the chips being properly programmed. And this does work if you program the locomotive correctly according to specifications, as long as you don't run into a situation where the chips suddenly power down. And as we all know, this is entirely possible, especially with older layouts that have been upgraded to DCC, and/or layouts with track work that isn't perfectly clean or not perfect in general. And sometimes even on layouts that are perfect. Whatever the case, when this sort of situation happens, and the chips do not power up in perfect sequence, it is entirely possible that one chip forgets the other, because there is no traffic cop to remind the other one that that chip exists, and they need to work in sync. A power surge like this can also deprogram one of the two chips, as because they are taking so much power from the same data bus line, they are much more sensitive to pulses than they would normally be with a single decoder. This is why these engines frequently have a problem with either losing sound or DCC control. Reason being is really quite simple, because one chip has fallen asleep and shut down, and there is no way of reminding the other chip it's still there and needs to be powered up. And the system isn't looking for it because, according to the DCC specifications, only one decoder is functioning at a time. Again, the way around this is to simply have both decoders programmed in sync. Now let's talk turkey about this locomotive. Well, to start with, there's the famous sound system, which Broadway Limited designed itself. And the first here, if you will, it sounds, well, pretty darn good. You have got to love that Doppler horn. As we start to get underway, we start to notice some annoying deficiencies. To start with, there aren't that many sound notches for the actual prime mover. It's very much limited in how much noise it's going to make. In other words, after you start notching the throttle up beyond a certain point, the prime mover simply has no further sound effects to actually go to. We also note the locomotive is prone to stalling very easily. This is because, again, it's running two decoders, not one, to accomplish the same task as one. And two decoders running at the same time translates into twice the power consumption. This situation also further aggravates the locomotive's tendency to lose DCC or sound.
Oh, come on.
And motor control is nothing to write home about either. It tends to just sort of jump the line and start moving rapidly and then slow down. Now, admittedly, the decoder has got its heritage in early 2000s technology, but still, even for the day, this was pretty bad. Further aggravating the problems this locomotive suffered from were its wheels. Again, as you'll find this pretty shocking, they were actually made of brass. Again, brass isn't great with conductivity, especially on nickel-silver rails. The similar metals never get along all that well. The end result, more erratic performance and more tendencies for the infamous decoders to run into problems. And we've just witnessed another unfortunate trait of this locomotive. The railability and/or the ability of this locomotive to hold the rails is way below subpar. And it's not clear as to why this is the case. I have had non-stop problems with RSD-15s, even the later Paragon series from Broadway Limited. While I will note I've never experienced this derailment issue with other Broadway Limited locomotives I own and have owned in the past, this particular RSD-15 model, despite all of its revisions and refinements, continues to suffer from these problems. With the exception of the most recent model that I understand just recently debuted, I think it's the Paragon 4 or 5 model. I gotta remember what the model is on that. Maybe I'll get one of those in if I ever get a price on one, but considering the bad record I've had with these particular engines, I'm not sure I'd be interested in it, despite the fact that I have an interest in the RSD-15s in general. Bottom line, the blue line of locomotives was a disaster for Broadway Limited. These engines, more often than not, got sent back to Broadway Limited with complaints about the sound cutting out, which of course ended usually with Broadway Limited reprogramming them and sending them back out again. Several different service bulletins were put out to reprogram these locomotives, including one that, if I remember correctly, was at one point posted on Broadway Limited's website, suggesting that people having issues getting sound and DCC to work in sync with these locomotives get a, quote, spare locomotive from their collection, essentially, and put the decoder in that, program it separately, and then put the decoder back in the locomotive again to make it function. This upset a lot of Broadway Limited's customers as they found it ridiculous that you needed 2 locomotives just to make the one work. Whatever the case, Broadway Limited finally gave up on these models. This is not to say that they were all bad. Steam engines that were Blue Line models with longer wheelbases, that is to say more driving wheels and physical pickups, were less prone to having the problem of the sound cutting out suddenly and/or failing, although it still did occur even with these models. The main issue here is that Broadway Limited always has promoted itself and has, for the most part, been a very high-quality, prestigious model. Now, as with a high-quality, prestigious car, BMW, Cadillac, take your pick, Mercedes, etc., if you drive it off the lot, the wheels fall off and the car is inoperative and or it blows an engine, etc., you're going to be angry. You wouldn't be as angry, however, if it was a lower-end model, so this further aggravated the whole situation. The end result was Broadway Limited pretty much giving up on this particular line of locomotives, introducing the new Paragon, I think it was 2 model, that succeeded these. Those models essentially taking over for these particular locomotives, equipped with the whole thing is DCC and sound from the factory. Because again, by this point, DCC systems were inexpensive compared to what they were, more capable, more reliable, and more people were getting into it. These models are still available. You can find them hanging around on websites for discount. Just be forewarned the decoder can be a pain to work with. My advice, though, is to consider putting a decoder from another manufacturer in there, such as Loke Sound or perhaps a TCS. I haven't seen any TCS decoders, at least as of making this video, that actually will drop in, although I wouldn't be surprised if the company coughs one up at one point here, as the company is known for things like that. But bottom line, I would not recommend keeping the Blue Line equipment on board with the engine. In short, this was a bit of a disaster for Broadway Limited, but the company seems to have learned from its mistakes and has gone back to good old-fashioned conventionality with its new models. And that's going to do it for this particular video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Please subscribe, and as always, keep the metal side down.